Here's successful global consultant, renowned author, and expert in operational excellence, Andrew Miller, talking to executives and managers at Boston Children's Hospital.
Can I have a volunteer? Anybody want to volunteer? Don't worry, it's not a magic show. I'm not going to make you come up and, okay. You just won yourself a free book. Congratulations. Can I have another volunteer?
I'll volunteer.
No free book for you. You're going to have to do some work now. No, you'll get a free book, but you will have to do some work. When you hear the term operational excellence, what do you think of?
A lean organization with people that are highly competent, all wanting to achieve the same goal and working towards it.
It's a good definition on the spot. Other thoughts on operational excellence? When I say that term, what do you guys think of? Efficiency. Okay, so lean, efficiency. Other words that come to mind? Customer satisfaction. Adaptive. So lean, efficiency, customer satisfaction, adaptive. What else?
Breaking down barriers.
Breaking down barriers, good. There's no right or wrong answer, by the way. Other thoughts?
Employee satisfaction.
Employee satisfaction. So a lot of the people, a lot of the customer, a lot of efficiency. So as Naomi mentioned in the outset in the introduction, I have written this book called Redefining Operational Excellence, and I'm always curious what groups and different organizations think when they hear the term operational excellence, because I've got my own thoughts about the definition, which we'll spend the next sort of 45 minutes or so talking about. But it's interesting that the first couple of thoughts came out were lean and efficiency and things like that, and it's not that it's wrong, and it's not that it's right. But that was the main reason why I actually wrote the book, because I feel like the fallback position or the default position we always have when we think about operations and excellence is lean, is Six Sigma, is efficiency, methodology, things like that. And again, I don't want to say that's wrong or that's right, but my view is when you look at certain things like that, like various methodologies, and we don't have to pick on lean or Six Sigma or any particular one, but when you look at a specific methodology as opposed to a mindset, you use it a bit as a crutch. So when we've got a methodology that says, here's all the tools that this methodology comes with, I see a lot of organizations take those tools and they use them as a crutch instead of actually sometimes using common sense and sometimes using critical thinking, because the map is there for you. The road has been mapped out for you to say, here's the 5 steps we have to follow. So it's got its advantages in certain places, but in other places it's not. It doesn't allow you to think critically. It doesn't allow you to think forward a little bit. And that's why for me, really the point I want to hammer home today is that operational excellence is a mindset. It's not a methodology. It's not a set of tools per se, but it's a mindset. It's that people show up and they think to themselves, how can I make this place better? And it doesn't always have to be, how do I make this entire organization better? It's how can I make my piece of the organization better? There's lots of seats up at the front if you want. Don't be shy. I don't bite. But it's all about the mindset of when you show up to work, when you're thinking about your work. We all have different roles, we all do different things, but it's thinking about what can we do to make even a small incremental improvement. It doesn't always have to be completely, totally innovative. It doesn't always have to be disruptive. It can be small. It can be an enhancement to a process. It can be moving a machine to a different place. But it's the mindset of how do we continuously improve where we are versus where we used to be. And it's these small incremental improvements on a daily basis that get you much closer to excellence. So there's really three, and actually Naomi touched on all 3 of them at the beginning, and we didn't actually even coordinate it, but you can tell what I like to talk about because it was in the bio. There's really 3 words I want to talk about today. Innovation, oh, there's actually 4 words, sorry. Innovation, collaboration, and boosting performance. So those are sort of 3 key themes that we're going to touch on today, because I think that that's really where excellence in healthcare is going. And when I talk about innovation, so I'm going to touch on each one a little bit, and then I'll get into a little more detail about each one. Innovation to me is such a broad word that before we can really do anything with that word in terms of organizational improvement, we really have to define what does that mean. And Naomi attended a breakfast that I held back in May, and that was one of the first questions we tackled is, for each organization, what really is innovation? Because innovation can be anything from a small process enhancement to completely disruptive new technology or a new medical device or a new procedure, and everything in between. So the first thing we have to think about when we talk about innovation is, what does innovation mean? But where I think is more important for organizations in the healthcare space, especially on the provider side, hospitals, clinics, those kinds of things, it isn't just about what are the new disruptive ideas, what are the new innovative ideas. There's lots of great ideas, and we're going to talk about that in a bit. I might actually even get you to come up with some. But I think where the difference between the most successful organizations is going to be versus the ones that aren't going to be as successful is in the application of those ideas. So it isn't just about coming up with new ideas, it's how do we increase the adoption of those ideas? How do we take those ideas and broaden the impact as much as we can, both within our own organizations, but also outside? And I think, to me, what I see as the organizations that are the most successful right now are the ones that are able to take those ideas, implement them, integrate them, and broaden the impact of them. And we'll talk about, I've got a bit of a process for that. As you can imagine, I'm a consultant. I like diagrams. They make things simple and visual. Collaboration. Collaboration, again, a big word. What does collaboration really mean? I'm not so concerned about the definition of collaboration. What do we mean by collaboration? What's more important for me is, what's the point of collaboration? Why are we collaborating? And I think, again, that's where I see a lot of challenges with organizations is they throw the word collaboration around, but they don't really know what they want to achieve by collaborating. So just I'll give you a quick example of a client that I was talking to a few months ago, and the head of the division said to me, we want to bring you in, we want you to do a workshop for my 50 senior managers on collaboration. And my first question back to him was, why? Why do you want to do that? And he couldn't really articulate it. He knew sort of intuitively why, but he couldn't really articulate it. He said, well, because we want to collaborate more. And I said, well, we're sort of going in circles here, but why do you want to collaborate more? You obviously think that there's a better outcome somewhere if you collaborate. Is that going to mean you're going to get better access to customers? Does it mean that your deal size is going to be bigger? Does it mean that you're going to be able to implement new products more quickly? What's the ultimate outcome that you're trying to achieve? Once we started having that discussion, we were able to progress a lot further, because it wasn't just about, let's have a workshop and talk about collaboration. It's about, we've got to find out why we want to collaborate. Then we do a workshop on showing the value of collaboration, not just collaboration in and of itself is important. So the second point that I'll talk about is, to me, collaboration is a mean to another end. And you've got to determine what is that end that you're trying to achieve by collaborating. The third is boosting performance. The most successful organizations know how to identify performance improvement areas on their own. And as Naomi said, what I help a lot of my clients do is identify those areas in areas they don't normally look. So there's obvious places to look and say, well, we can cut this, or we can enhance that, or we can do something over here. But a lot of the biggest opportunities can come in areas where you wouldn't normally think they are there. So the most successful organizations can do what I call DIY improvements, meaning do-it-yourself performance boosts, as opposed to DUI, performance boost. It's a whole different story. I've got some stories about that we can talk about later. But those are the three themes. So again, innovation, but from the context of application of ideas, collaboration in the context of understanding why we want to collaborate and what are the better results we think we can get, and then boosting performance from the sense of being able to identify areas within your own organization, by your own organization, to be able to do this. So let's talk about innovation first. And I know this might be a little tough for some of you to see because of the angle, but I'll try and keep it simple. 2 lines. So on the bottom axis, we have implementation and execution. And on this axis, we have quality of ideas. So this is, again, being a consultant, we like charts. It's your sort of standard double axis chart. In a minute, I'm going to ask you where you think you sit. But we have 4 quadrants: high, low, and then poor, strong. So what this chart really means is there's one of 4 quadrants you can fall into as an organization. There's 2 factors that we think about. The first is the quality of your ideas as an organization. Do you have a high quality of ideas or a low quality of ideas, right? That's the first part of how you assess yourself. The second part is your ability to implement and execute those ideas. So do you have a strong ability to do that or a poor ability to do that? Straightforward so far? 4 quadrants? 1, 2, 3, 4. Can I have a volunteer? Okay, you get a book and you have to answer a question. Where would you put Boston Children's Hospital on this chart?
4.
Number 4. Okay? Meaning that you have a high quality of ideas, but a poor ability to implement and execute on those ideas. So, as I mentioned earlier, I held a breakfast meeting back in May, and this was one of the things that we talked about. The theme of the breakfast was how do we increase the adoption of innovation, but with innovation in the context of new ideas. So I just want to share with you sort of what we came up with as a collective group. So Naomi was there, but it was also healthcare executives from other hospitals and other healthcare organizations from across the Boston area. So it was a good, I think, cross-reference of people. We came up with some common themes in terms of how do you foster an innovative culture? And a lot of it, because I can't speak to where you put yourselves in the quadrant, because I don't know your organization well enough to be able to say that. But I can say that I know a lot of organizations fall into that quadrant. The quality of ideas in organizations that I work with tends to be very high, but their ability to implement and execute them tends to be very low. For numerous reasons, some of which you've already mentioned, some of which are varied as well. But I think what's important to understand is, so how do we help improve that ability to execute, that ability to implement? So I just want to share some of the, I guess, characteristics is the best word I can think of that we came up with at this breakfast event and that I've sort of expanded upon, that I see the most successful organizations do in terms of not only the quality of the ideas and innovation, but also their ability to execute. The first is giving employees the freedom to fail. Now, it is healthcare. I do a lot of work with hospitals, so I understand what that word failure sometimes means. But I think we have to look at risk and failure as not always catastrophic. I'm certainly not suggesting that hospitals have to take a chance with a patient where the outcome could possibly be the patient dies as opposed to doesn't die. But there are certain situations where prudent risk needs to be taken. So when we talk about giving employees the freedom to fail, we've got to understand what are those situations where we can allow the employees to have the freedom to fail. Because a lot of times what you see with a lot of these new innovations is sometimes they don't work at first. And you do sort of a trial by error, and you learn off of what you've experienced in the past. So there has to be that ability, that controlled ability for what I'll call productive failure. And what you'll see sort of as a theme in these, though, it also has to start at the top. Whatever behaviors an organization wants their people to exhibit has to be exhibited at the top. So if you say, well, we want an entrepreneurial culture, meanwhile, the executive team is focused on micromanaging every single element of the business, those two things are in conflict. So whatever the direction the organization wants to go, they also have to exhibit those right behaviors all the way from the top down, because people will follow those behaviors. The second is focusing on making improvements, not just solving problems. So one of the issues is a strong word, but one of the challenges I always see with certain methodologies is it's about problem resolution. It's not about raising the bar. So we were doing something, we had a problem that got us to here, we resolved the problem, so it restored our past performance. But it didn't necessarily take us to the next level, right? So there are times when problem resolution is necessary, we have to fix something, but there's other times where the organization needs to focus on how do we get better, how do we raise the bar from where we currently are. Rewarding attitude and behavior, not just victories. So that's tied into the first point around productive failure, is an organization has to has to show the behavior that it wants, but it also has to reward that behavior. So it doesn't mean that you're only rewarding successes, because sometimes a failure is just as good as a success. Again, if it's a productive failure, that's going to help you move forward. And you wouldn't be able to move forward without that failure. Evaluating people on their contribution to innovative practices. So this is something I'm not sure, and maybe you guys do it, but I don't think I've ever seen an organization who actually evaluates people as part of their performance reviews to say, how much are you contributing to developing new innovative practices? Doesn't mean that that's the only thing you're evaluated on. We all have different roles and we've got things that are expected of us. But if you really want to create foster a culture of innovation and a culture where quality of ideas are brought forward and implemented and executed, then you've got to measure people's ability to do that. And how much are you as an individual contributing to that culture? Encouraging internal and external collaboration, which I'll talk about collaboration in a minute. But I think it's important, again, to foster that culture of ideas, implementation, execution, effective execution. We've got to look at where should we collaborate? Why are we collaborating? Who should we be collaborating with? Right? How can we improve the outcomes, improve the results that we're trying to achieve through collaboration? Sometimes it'll make sense, sometimes it won't. And the last point is formally managing the innovation or the ideas process. So actually having a formal process to say, here's how we're going to manage the ideas. Whether that's a central place for ideas to get sent in, whether it's a central team that then evaluates the ideas, we have to look at saying we actually have to manage this idea process so that we don't have too many priorities. So we actually have a formal way to say, how are we going to decide and how are we going to distinguish a good idea from a bad idea? And if it's a bad idea, or even if it's not a bad idea, but it's a good idea, we're just not going to do anything about, what's the process to do that? So I want to try, I'm glad nobody's sitting here, they'd be very sorry. I call this my cycle of innovation. And I'm going to spell this right, as I talk and spell at the same time, sometimes a challenge. But this is a process that I've used with some of my clients to do exactly what I'm discussing, formally manage this idea process. So how do you move from where you are to over here? Because this is ultimately, right, where do you want to get to? You've already got the high quality of ideas, so that's not as big a concern. It's how do we now leverage and take advantage of those ideas? So it's a multi-step process. The first step is gathering the ideas. So how do we gather them? What's the formal way that we gather the ideas within the organization? You've got thousands of people that work here. I'm sure everybody at some point over the course of their day, their week, their month, they've got an idea that says, I know that this would be better, this would be easier. We could do things faster, we could do with patients better, whatever it might be. I'm sure you've all had ideas. But you've got to have a way to get those ideas somewhere. So how do we gather them up? How do we review them? So again, starting to work on, now we've got a whole bunch of ideas coming into a funnel. And I know I've made this as a circle, but you could think of it as a funnel where really you want to spit out what are the best ideas that are going to have the broadest impact. So how do we review the ideas? How do we classify them? There's lots of different types of ideas. Some are going to be disruptive and require investment and time and money, and others are going to be, we just have to pick up the machine and move it over here, right? So how do you classify the different types of ideas and say, which ones are we not doing anything with, which ones are we going to do something with but don't require a lot of time and investment, and which ones are going to require time, investment, and possibly even money? Prioritize. How do we then prioritize the ideas? And you may prioritize them based on the different classifications you've set up. But again, this speaks to what you were talking about earlier, is how do we focus on a small number of priorities where we think we're going to have the biggest impact? So as you're going through sort of these three steps, you're going to have criteria that you're going to use to say, and it's different for every organization depending on what's most important. But you're going to look at these and say, what are the criteria that we're going to use to help us make this decision? Once you've prioritized, then you've got a plan. Because at this point, once you get to this step, you're talking about a small number of ideas. You're not talking about tens or hundreds. You might be talking about a select few, maybe 3, 4, or 5, that have really made it through the first 3 or 4 steps and say, these are ones that we're really going to put some time and effort behind. Now, you may have some smaller ones like the joke I used about moving the machine. You may do those otherwise, don't really require a plan. That's just, okay, that's a really good idea, just go do it, right? Then we get to execute. So we've made our plan, we've got a few ideas that we're going to tackle. We've developed how we're going to go about tackling them. We've assigned accountability, who's going to tackle them, who's got to do what to make them work. Now we've just got to execute on it. A lot of times the reason for poor execution happens here. It's because we don't prioritize effectively enough, and even if we do prioritize, we don't plan effectively enough. We don't identify who's going to be doing what, who's ultimately accountable for the success, right? We don't have teams and committees. That's not accountability. Accountability falls to one person. Ultimately, if this thing succeeds or fails, who's the one person that's going to benefit or could be to their detriment, right? You might have people working on it, other people have responsibilities for it, but in my view, ultimately, it's got to fall to one person who's accountable for success or failure. And then I think the key point that a lot of organizations miss is integrate. So we're executing on the plan. How do we integrate it into our operations? Because that's the part that allows for sustainability. We've got these ideas, we've got a plan, we start executing on the plan, people start doing stuff, and then we've made the change, people get busy, they defer back to what they used to do, they make a little change to what process was changed or the new innovation that you're tackling. So we miss that integration step. And then 6 months down the road, we look at this and say, was it a success or not? I'm not so sure because we're not really doing it the way we said we were going to do it. So it's that integration step that's really important also to say, now how do we integrate this into the way that we operate as an organization? That's also where you can start to think about where is there a broader impact for this. So if you're implementing a new idea in a particular department, that integration part is also starting to ask, where else might this apply? Are there other departments where this might apply? Are there other areas of the organization this might apply? Are there other organizations where this might apply? Right? Partners that you have, people that you work with, some way to do that. Because sometimes, going on the commercialization side, there might be ideas where you can actually turn this into a revenue generator. You never know. That's why it's important to have that single process. That's why I like these kinds of talks with people from various departments within the same organization, because you're right, your view is very different. And sometimes it's hard to speak at an organizational level. But you can see that just from the discussion we've had so far, there's discrepancies across different areas. So that's why the word discipline always sticks in the back of my head when I'm talking to organizations, because sometimes that's a lot of all it takes, is just having some discipline to do things the same way across multiple areas, multiple departments. Other thoughts on this?
And
Yes.
Throughout the process, kind of going back to what Lindsay said, you might be in the prioritization or the planning stage, and then all of a sudden somebody else has a new priority that, now you have to bump that out, and it sort of gets interrupted, and it never gets to, or it doesn't never get there, but it's hard to get to the integrate stage when there's more stuff coming.
Sure.
And it doesn't seem like anything ever goes away.
Right.
Just more new stuff comes on, and it's all important, but when you've been around an organization for a certain length of time, you see cycles happen, and you get yourself a little bit, jaded, like, oh, well, this is the flavor of the month.
That's right, here we go
now,
again.
Here we
Yeah.
go, and
Yeah.
then, well, this will die down after a while, and then somebody
Right.
else will have some new priority, and and you feel like you're always just chasing stuff, and
Right.
not really doing it in any conscious, organized process.
And I think to speak to that, that's why this part is so important, and that's why you should really only be spitting out a small number of ideas, right? Because, so let's say that your situation happens. I mean, what I would suggest is, that whatever the new priority is, you got to run it through the same criteria that you ran the other ones through. And yes, you might come up and say, well, we've got 3 that we've decided upon already. Is this new one a higher or lower priority than those 3? If it's a higher priority, one of those 3 gets bumped. If it's a lower priority, right?
Yeah,
And
that doesn't happen.
well, that's why we're talking today.
Okay.
Yes, Naomi.
So this has a lot of parallels to the innovation life cycle
Yes.
that I work with the innovators on. And what we find is everything's pretty easy up until you get to what you call the integrate phase, which we call the operationalization gap, or OGAP. You can do something at a small scale, but trying to do it at a larger scale becomes a much bigger proposition. So one of the pieces of advice I always give my innovators, and maybe we'll talk about this also, is that you need to be looking down the line and not just thinking about if, I just need to be successful, let me be successful, but if I'm successful, how will I cross the OGAP, how will I integrate it, and who needs to be involved? And if you can start thinking about that early on and get those folks into prioritization, into planning, then it helps actually get across the OGAP. It gets you through the execution phase much better, rather than sort of showing up with a fait accompli and saying, now you all have to do what
That's right.
my brilliant idea.
Yeah.
So
And I think that's a good point. And again, that's why critically that prioritize and plan phase is so important, because it looks simple when I draw it, and I've seen yours as well. It's so simple when you see it in a diagram, but that's a really hard phase to go through. Because to your point, what's got to happen in that prioritize and plan phase, because you're now picking the 2 or 3 top ideas the organization's going to work on, or at least it's going to have a broader impact. So you've got to start looking at and asking those kinds of questions: is what other impacts can this have? So as you're going through this prioritization, you've got to be saying to yourself, what impact can this have? Where is it going to have the broadest impact? Can I make it a bigger impact? Who do I need to get involved with now so that we can make the integration easier? Who are the influencers? Who are the decision makers? You're right, so it's not just, we've got a small team that says, okay, here's what we're working on. We go make the change and then say to 150 people, now you guys have to go make this, go implement this, do it yourself. And they're saying, wait a second, I got 50 different priorities and nobody told me about this one, right? And I'm not accountable for the success or failure of this. So that's the other part too, is where that accountability comes in. And the transition, I'll call it, from the execution to the integrator, or the OGAP, is, so who's going to transition ownership now? So who's going to be ultimately accountable for the ongoing sustainability of this, right? So you've got your innovators, they're working on getting it to a certain stage. What's the expectation once that stage has been accomplished? They can say, we've done our job, we made the change, it's ready to go, but ultimately who now takes ownership of it? So it's sort of like a project, right? A project has a start and an end date. But I've always said, well, once the project ends, it doesn't mean that the work stops. It's transitioning from project to operations. So ultimately, who's accountable on the operations side? And we've got to get them involved, probably even in the prioritize stage, but certainly in the planning stage. Once you've identified what the idea is and who it's going to impact, that's when those people have to get involved, because ultimately, they're the people that are going to have to own it. It forces you to identify what your expectations are right up front, right? So a lot of that, what you're describing, and I've seen it in a lot of different places, healthcare and not, you've got high achievers that want to do stuff and have their own agendas, but they also have to understand what's expected of them. And if nobody's clearly saying, this is what's expected of you, and this is how it aligns with the rest of the organization and where we're trying to go. So people have to understand where they fit in the organization, not just I'm a physician or a clinician or a nurse and this is what I do, but ultimately where they fit and how what they're doing helps drive the organization forward. So there is, I don't want to sound sort of fluffy and cheesy, but there's got to be a bigger goal here for the organization, saying we want to be whatever we want to be, but that's got to make its way down, and every level of the organization has to understand this is what's expected of you in order to help us get there. So that's part of it, is the expectation. The second piece is you're using a common set of decision-making criteria, right? So again, you're not necessarily plowing this through and saying, ye shall do this, but you're creating a set of decision-making criteria that, again, the expectation is this is what you're using in order to make these kinds of decisions, right? It takes away this sort of idea of, I call it the squirrel effect, where like a squirrel's running and like a dog always, no matter what they're doing, they see a squirrel, they run, right? So there's all these awesome, amazing things going on around you, but you've got to have some kind of, consistent discipline to say, we've got to drive ourselves in the same direction, even if there's some flexibility in it. So I don't want to create the impression that this is a static model that doesn't change, it doesn't move, and you do it once and then you're good. This is constantly evolving and changing as the organization does, because it has to account for those things that you're talking about. But it also has to create some discipline to say, here's the criteria that we're using to make decisions. If you want funding for an idea that you've got, then you're going to have to go through these same decision-making criteria that we're all using. So that's where part of it too is, right? I'm here for a short period of time, but if I've got a really cool idea and I want to pursue it, I might need somebody's help on it. So there is a bit of a process without creating an immense amount of bureaucracy.
So then is it by nature then the high quality of ideas creates this bottleneck? Therefore sometimes maybe less is more, having, say, low ideas, just maybe one or two?
Well, no, but I think that there's what you're talking about. You're talking about number of ideas, right? So I would never want to stifle the quality of the ideas, but that's why it's important as you go through this process or whatever process you're using, you're only spitting out a small number of ideas based on the criteria and the decisions that you're making, to say we're only going to pursue a few of these ideas, because you can't prioritize 15 or 20 different ideas, right? You've got to prioritize and put resources behind a small amount. So that's where the common decision-making criteria comes in and says, if you've got an idea, here's how we're going to assess whether or not we're going to do something with it. So again, it sets the expectation across the organization to say, if I've got something I want to share, I know what the expectation is in terms of how the organization is going to assess whether or not this is a good idea. Make sense?
One squirrel at a time.
Sorry?
One squirrel at a time.
One squirrel at a time. Okay. I want to talk about, because I promised I would talk about collaboration and performance boosts as well, although innovation is a very exciting topic. But as I said about collaboration, collaboration is a means to another end. You've got to really understand what that end is when you're trying to collaborate, because there's internal collaborations, there's external collaborations. I'm guessing you have no shortage of what I'll call industry companies, banging on your door saying, we'd love to partner with you, we'd love to collaborate with you. You've got lots of academic hospitals, you've got lots of academic institutions, you've got startups, you've got mature organizations. So, I would imagine you have no shortage of people saying, we want to partner with you. I think the key around collaboration, though, again, going back to decision-making criteria, is not only understanding why you want to collaborate, but having, again, a bit of a formal process to decide who are we going to collaborate with, and why are we collaborating with them in the first place.
Trust.
Trust? It's a very important one. Trust in what sense, though? Trust is a big word. So break it down for me.
Well, whether they are going to steal your ideas that you're and walk off with them, whether what you're giving them, then they'll take on as their own and not give anything back to you. So
Mhm.
what the relationship should be and how's it going to go.
Right. Good. And the reason I ask is because for trust, for me, I have a different variation on that. Because you're right. I mean, there's the extent of, do we trust that they're not going to steal our stuff and take it. But for me, the other part of trust is assuming that that's not going to happen. Trust is, do they have our best interest in mind, right? Not just their own, right? Especially when you're looking to partner with, what I'll call industry suppliers, companies that supply products and services to your hospital. That, to me, that kind of trust is a really important one. Do they have our best interest, our patient's best interest in mind? They're not just trying to sell us something. Other thoughts?
Do they have relationship capital that will help you drive the idea?
That's right. That's right. So, a lot of it comes down to, can they help us get stuff done that we couldn't get done on our own, right? And I've got a few, which I think you've covered all of them. But my first thought was expected results. So if we're going to collaborate, do we expect that the results are going to be better than if we did this on our own, right? So I think that, results can, and when I say results, I don't necessarily mean financial. I think, to me, that's a separate component of it, which is equally important. But do we think that by collaborating either internally or externally, that we're going to actually get better results from what we're trying to achieve? As relationship, again, going back to trust, do we trust that they've got our best interest in mind? One, I don't think it was mentioned, I just threw out the word timing. And I mean timing in two different ways, and I'll talk about both of them. Timing being, is it the right time to collaborate? Are we as an organization ready to collaborate at this time? But also timing from the perspective of, if we collaborate, is that going to add a significant amount of time to achieving the results that we want? So it's a bit of a trade-off to say, well, if we think that we can get here on our own, but if we collaborate, we can get here, but it's going to take an extra year or 6 months, that's a trade-off that you have to think about, right? Are we willing to wait an extra 6 months to get a better outcome or a better result, or are we better off just trying to do it ourselves? Obviously, costs or ROI, are there additional costs? Are there additional savings? Is there a bigger return if we collaborate? And then the one thing which I always talk about is impact. So if we collaborate, can we have a broader impact? So not just the results will be better on an individual case-by-case basis, not just it's financially better for us, but can we actually have a broader impact? And that might mean broader within your own organization or across the healthcare industry as a whole. So those are sort of 5 or 6. You guys threw out a couple of other ones. Again, I advise my clients that when you're talking about collaboration, it's important to have these types of criteria as you're making decisions. Again, a big organization, not a lot of consistency in how decisions are made. So when you want to talk about these big words like innovation, collaboration, it's important that we're looking, we're sort of singing from the same song sheet, so to speak. And we don't want to create methodologies that are so, I was going to use the word intrusive, but intrusive is the wrong word, but so limiting that there's no flexibility. But what you do want to have is some kind of common guideline, some kind of common criteria. That as we're all going back to our jobs, in about 20 minutes or whatever it is, and we start thinking about, and somebody comes to us with an idea or a partnership opportunity, think of the power if we're all starting to think about the same 4 or 5 criteria. We may not all interpret them the same way, we may not all make decisions the same way, but it creates a bit of consistency and a little bit of discipline in terms of how the organization as a whole is making decisions. And the last point I want to talk about is performance boosts. So again, as I mentioned, the do-it-yourself performance boosts, because I think the ability to find performance boosts and performance improvements in areas you don't normally look is a very powerful tool for an organization to have. So again, I like to keep things somewhat simple, and I always start this conversation with a bunch of questions that organizations should be asking themselves. Because I often get my clients in other organizations say, well, how do we do this? How do we implement this? And I'm a fairly simple guy. I like things that are simple. So I say, well, start by asking yourself a bunch of what are seemingly simple questions, but as you get in a little deeper, they help you identify areas of the organization you want to look at. The first is, what areas of your organization have not recently been reviewed, updated, or changed? So I've always said, if you show me a department or a process or an area where there hasn't been a change in 15 or 20 years, then I'll be able to turn that place upside down and get tremendous improvement there. Just on the sheer fact that nobody's looked at it for a while. But that's my philosophy, is if you haven't looked at a particular way of doing things for a set period of time, and there's no threshold, whether that's 5 years, 10 years, it doesn't matter. But if you haven't looked at a certain way of doing things in a while, I guarantee that there's an opportunity to improve the way you do that process, that procedure, that's something. That's why things are constantly changing in healthcare, because we're constantly looking at how do we do things, how do we get the same outcome or better outcomes in a different way. The second is, how can you provide more value to patients in an area where the delivery of care is changing? So there's 2 parts to this question. So how do you offer a better outcome to patients where the delivery model is changing? But sort of a corollary to that is, how can you change the delivery model to get better outcomes for your patients? So part of it is things change that are out of our control. How do we adjust to those? How do we benefit and leverage those? But then the other part is, how do we actually proactively look to make these changes? I know this is stuff that you guys do every day. But again, areas of improvement, that's where you can look. Are you clear on the direction that the organization is trying to go? So we talked about sort of clarity of message a little bit in saying, if this is the direction that the executive team says we want to take this hospital, we want to be the #1 pediatric hospital in North America. Does everybody understand that? And does everybody understand their role in helping this place become the #1 pediatric hospital in North America? What does that mean for all the various departments and levels of this organization? Because each level, each department, it's going to mean something different in terms of outcomes, expectations, performance boost, and things like that. But are you clear on the direction? And I think the most important second part of this question is, do you have the right people for the current and future needs of the organization? So if you know that this is where the organization wants to go, we can assess the people that we have here and say, well, we've got the right people for where we are. But the important question is, do we have the right people for where we want to be? If we know that this is where we're going, do we have all the right people to help us get there? What areas of the organization have yet to be exploited? And I mean exploited in a positive way. Meaning, where can we leverage? Where can we get more? It's sort of that classic thing where I'm sure we've all had this thought, whether it's within our own organization or you go to a restaurant or another business and you say, I know that there's a better way to do this, right? We've all had that thought in our heads. You look at something and say, this makes no sense. If any of you have rented a car recently, you go to a rental car counter, you sit there for 15 or 20 minutes, and all I keep thinking to myself is, this is not the best way to do this. Like, I could do all of this stuff online before I even check in. Why do I have to show up and give them all of my information like we're 25 years ago, right? So we've all had those moments where we've been doing something, standing at a counter in front of somebody saying, there's no way that this is the most efficient, most effective way to do that. So when you've got that in your head, then you just have to take it that one step further and say, if I know there's a better way to do it, I need to start investigating that a little deeper and say, now let me figure out what that way is, right? You wouldn't do that if you're necessarily standing at a rental counter. You're not going to give them advice on how to do it better. But you're doing it when you're in your own jobs saying, I know this doesn't make sense. There's got to be a better way to do it. Take it that step further and say, now what would I change? How could I go about making that change? And the last and really that was my last point is, what processes, what procedures, what policies make you say, I know there's a better way of doing it. I just don't know what it is, or I haven't taken the time to think about it. So I know that some of you have to leave at 1, so I'm gonna close up with one final question. Can any of you think of, so I've given away, I think, 4 books. So for those of you that I pointed at, make sure you come and collect your book. But does anyone know the common characteristic that I used for the people that I handed out the 4 books to? Yeah.
Volunteerism.
Right. So it's a very good point. And so I want to use that point to just hammer this mindset idea home, because I like doing these kind of talks, but I like them to be interactive. So when you're trying to change a mindset, you've got to reward and encourage the behavior that you want. So I wanted people to volunteer. So you'll notice the people who I gave books to were the people that put their hands up first, right? And you saw as soon as the first person, I forget who it was, to put their hand up, right? And then all of a sudden the second person was right away, right? So that was the behavior that I wanted people to exhibit, was to participate, and I wanted to reward people for being the first to offer to participate. So if you want to understand how to change the mindset of an organization, that was a microcosmic example of how to do that. So on that note, I want to thank you for having me here today. I'm happy to stick around if anybody wants to chat further, but I know some of you got to get off to go do what you do well. So I'll let you do that. Thank you for having me.
For more information, contact the phone number or the email address on the screen.